I'd like to now talk about our children and the importance of getting all of them back to in-person learning. We've set the goal of March 1st to do that, and we're moving along. We know that the pandemic has really been disruptive in some way for all the children, just as it's been disruptive for all adults in Ohio. In the spring, all Ohio children were out of school. And during this academic year, some kids have been entirely remote, some have been entirely in the classroom, and some have been a combination of the two. And some have lost some days because of quarantines. And just as adults have felt the strain of this pandemic, so certainly have our children. It's been a strain even for the kids who have been totally in the classroom for the whole academic year. Their lives have been changed as well. We are making great progress in our goal to have every child back in school by March 1st. I made it a priority to vaccinate teachers and school personnel. And sometimes people say, well, why are we doing that? We're doing it so that we can get our children back in school. It's a priority. I base that on conversations I've had for a number of months with parents, with educators. Just I think the urgent necessity to get our children back in school. We started in regard to the vaccination last week. We are now in our second week. The vaccine rollout looks different across the state. From Kroger's doing 2,000 staff members a day at a large clinic in Franklin County to up in Allen County, the public health department traveling to individual school districts to administer the shots. In 1 week, 566 schools have had teachers and staff vaccinated. And at the end of this week, more than 1,300 schools will have had teachers and staff vaccinated. These are public schools, these are private schools, parochial schools, charter public schools as well. We are already really seeing a change. We're seeing a movement from remote learning to being back in the classroom. Just as an example, in December, 45% of Ohio students were in fully remote schools. Today, that number is less than 15%. The number of districts that are fully remote has moved from 219 in the first week of January to only 35 this week. And these are, let's look at the charts. This is where we were. This is where we were on January 7th. And I would point out, just to look at the fully remote are the dark blue color. This is where we were February 4th, and big, as you can see, quite a significant change. So we're happy for that movement. This week we learned more about how our children are doing when the Ohio Department of Education released its fall 2020 enrollment and assessment data. And it confirms what we suspected, that some of our kids are not doing as well as we would like them to be doing. Joining us today is Superintendent of Public Instruction, Paulo DeMaria, to talk about this. Mr. Superintendent, thanks for joining us, and tell us a little bit about the report that you issued.
Governor, it's great to be with you. I very much appreciate this opportunity to share some of this data that really reflects the status of our students and the education system, reflecting the early part of this new academic school year. I first want to say thank you to all the educators and school leaders across our great state just for demonstrating incredible dedication and creativity, commitment, compassion, resilience, care, and love for students and all the work they do, and in particular over this past year. It's been hard, but it would have been much harder without the steadfast commitment of our students and our schools and our teachers and everyone rallying together in the interest of our students. I really appreciate the fact that you prioritized teachers for the vaccination, because it's really going to make a difference. As you said, last week we released some data and analysis based on our early collection of enrollment data and our fall assessments. And as you said, the bottom line is there's really not too many surprises here. It's pretty much what we expected to see. It gives us some insights into the impact of the school building closure that took place last spring. So let's start with enrollment. As you might expect, the data showed that at the beginning of the school year, there was an overall decrease in enrollment of about 3%. And the greatest concentration of that really is in the preschool and kindergarten arenas, which suggests, what you might think, that some parents and some families opted to hold off on starting their children in school during the pandemic. The other factor that we suspect is at play is in the upper grades. And while we don't and really won't have exact numbers, we likely have seen more high school students dropping out for the time being, maybe to get a job to support a struggling family, maybe to take care of siblings or other adults, things that have taken place in their lives that require them to respond. So let's talk a little bit about the assessments. The data that we released also includes data around our kindergarten readiness assessments. And these are assessments that are administered right at the beginning of the year to gauge a student's readiness for kindergarten as they enter kindergarten. And the other assessment is our third grade English language arts assessment, which is an early snapshot for where students are in respect to the third grade reading guarantee that we have in Ohio. First, I like to think about participation. I think it's really amazing that we had such great participation in the assessments in the fall, because it shows that around 80% of students participated compared to about 90 to 95% that would participate in a traditional year. One of the reasons we think the numbers are lower, of course, is that we promoted a safety first mentality. So no one was forced to take the assessments or to bring students to school if they didn't feel it was safe for them to do so. And we emphasized that we did not want to compromise safety. But in fact, I was expecting the participation rates to be even lower. So I think it's a real tribute to the fact that even in this disrupted environment, we can administer assessments safely, and it can happen fairly smoothly and without much difficulty. So what do the numbers show in terms of student performance? Again, as we expected, because of the disruption, scores were lower. There's no surprise there. Lower scores are particularly notable among minority students and disadvantaged students. Let's start with kindergarten. What we saw was about an 8 percentage point increase in those students who scored not on track. So more students were not on track as they were entering kindergarten. At the same time, there was only a slight increase in the percentage of children who were really scoring at the lowest performance level. That's called emerging readiness. And there was only about 1.2 percentage points more students in that lowest category. On the third grade tests, we saw that there was about 8 percentage points lower scoring proficiency or better. That's about 37% this past fall, as compared to 45% scoring proficient or better in the fall of 2019. Almost all the districts, about 87%, had a decrease in their percentage of third grade students scoring proficient or better between 2019 and 2020. Now, while this data is really helpful for all of us to understand what's going on, I caution people not to extrapolate from the average. Every student is different, every student's circumstances are different, and each student really merits an individual understanding of where they are academically and socially and what they really need to succeed. One of the things we did was we also looked at the data in relation to instructional delivery and how that is taking place in the current year. And what we saw was that in fully remote districts, that those third grade proficiency rates decreased a little more substantially by about 12 percentage points, as compared to about an 8 percentage point drop in districts that were using primarily a 5-day in-person model. Of course, these tests really reflect more what happened at the end of last school year rather than what happened this year, but it's important to understand those differentiations as we go forward. This is the first statewide assessment data that we've had since the start of the pandemic, and it really emphasizes the importance of getting students fully back to school. In that way, then identifying how best to help them resume their academic journey, helping them be prepared for success for the rest of this school year, and then leading up into the next school year. The challenge that we all face in the education community is really how do we identify the students, what their greatest needs are, and then what we do to support them in order to help them continue to move forward. as I said, a lot of this is not really surprising to anyone. In fact, I think schools and districts have understood these realities, already have been making plans to take action to support those students and help them continue to accelerate. And it's important that we really are deliberate in planning for extended learning time and other responses to meeting students' needs. Governor, I want to thank you for your budget recommendations. I know you're going to talk about those a little bit more here, as well as to the federal government for all the infusion of financial resources that is taking place. Those resources and that commitment is going to help schools and educators position themselves to support our students through this pandemic and beyond, addressing the realities and the impacts of the disruption that they've experienced. Governor, you always make your priorities clear, the importance of education, the importance of taking care of students who are our future, and we really appreciate that. Thanks so much for all you do.
Well, Mr. Superintendent, thank you very much. I mean, you make a lot of very interesting points, but I think your caution that all of us look at each individual student, and that's so very, very important. And as we look to see what we can do in the future to close some of these gaps, which you point out, we're seeing the biggest gaps with minority students and disadvantaged students, but what we can do to close those individual gaps, we do have to focus on that particular child, because every child is different, every child learns different, and every child is in a different situation. So we thank you for those cautions, and we thank you for your good work. Thank you very much.